Look at this tiny metallic rectangle pressed into the back of a credit card. It looks harmless. It feels smooth against my thumb. It reflects light in a cold strip. It makes a quiet little click when I slide it into a reader. And yet, the very sight of it raises a question that has kept pastors awake at night for decades. What if such a small object were the visible sign of something far larger and far older? A question that moves from technology to theology to personal faith. I am going to walk you through 4 distinct clues from scripture, history, linguistics, and modern science that clarify what the mark of the beast could really involve. I will show you how the biblical description fits into patterns we see in governments, markets, and machines, and why that matters for you right now. You may feel alarm rising or curiosity sharpening. Either way, stay with me, because this is not just about imagining a future. It is about making a decision today. The last book of the Bible opens with a series of figures that confuse and frighten readers. Revelation 13 speaks of 2 beasts and of a mark required to buy and sell. It describes a beast with authority and a second beast that causes people to worship the first and to accept a mark on their hand or on their forehead. Deuteronomy speaks of signs placed on the hand and between the eyes as a reminder of covenantal obedience. Those 2 images, the hand and the forehead, are not arbitrary. They were concrete symbols in Jewish practice, phylacteries bound to skin and hair in prayer. In the New Testament, the scenes of worship, coercion, and idolatry are layered over imperial imagery. Some ancient manuscripts and scholars point to Nero or to Roman systems of allegiance as a historical first fulfillment, while others read the passage as layered prophecy that stretches into our own age. Listen to how interpreters across centuries describe the beasts as systems of power, not merely single persons. Imagine smoke-smelling stones and the muffled chant of an emperor's court, translated into the shrill hiss of propaganda and the clanging of market bells. Here is a crucial moment to pause and imagine the weight of that altar, a tactile heat on the skin, a voice demanding allegiance. I will refer to passages by name so you can check them for yourself. Apocalypse 13, Deuteronomy, and the text that ties the name and number together. I quote, "Not to frighten, but to illuminate how the biblical authors used political, religious, and numeric language to warn their communities." If that sounded like ancient history, you might be surprised by how similar the language is to what we see in modern surveillance technology. Picture a city skyline stitched with eyes, cameras embedded in street lamps, microphones listening to voices, and algorithms tracing patterns. The sight of dozens of cameras makes your skin crawl. The low hum of data centers feels like a pulse against the city's rib cage. And the taste of metal is almost in your mouth when you think about what all that scanning knows about you. Today, artificial intelligence links faces to financial records to social profiles. Patterns become identity signatures. Biometric payment methods tie a bodily feature or a device to the ability to transact. A tiny chip, an implanted token, a digital identity can act like a seal on a commercial ledger. If placed in the hands of a controlling authority, such systems could enforce exclusion from markets and services. This is not speculation, it is a description of capability, which is why I will lay out 3 technical pathways and 2 historical comparisons so you can see the parallels clearly. I want to take a moment to address privacy and security, which are central to this whole conversation. For that reason, I rely on encrypted communications, secure backup, and simple habits that limit exposure. The tools do not protect your soul, but they do protect your privacy and give you time to think and pray before you make a public decision. If you need a practical step right away, turn off biometric payment features, lock apps that track you, and talk with your church leaders about identity and conscience. This little pause connects the investigative portion with an immediate practical bridge. We will return to Scripture and to a public scene that reveals what the mark looks like in daily life in just a moment. The question about a mark on the hand or forehead ties back to both ritual and rebellion. Deuteronomy instructed Israel to bind words as a sign on the hand and between the eyes as an act of remembrance. In the Christian reading, Revelation flips the symbol as a test of worship. The hand is work and action, the forehead is thought and allegiance. To have a mark in either location is to have a visible sign of loyalty to a system, not to God. Imagine the texture of parchment, the pressure of ink, and the warmth of skin where a sign would rest. Picture also the smell of the temple incense and the metallic taste of coin as people exchange worship for commerce. Theologically, the mark functions as both identity and allegiance. The beast demands not only private compliance, but public recognition. The ritual being inverted from a covenantal reminder into a tool of coercion is precisely what makes this passage so urgent for believers and so complicated for historians. Now let me tell you a bit of my story so you understand where I am coming from. I grew up in a small town with a mother who read scripture aloud every evening and a father who worked in systems design. Their world balanced prayer and code. In childhood, I learned to knot a small prayer cloth and to take apart a radio to see the circuit paths. In university, I studied ancient languages, and later I worked with data systems that matched faces to payment records. Those two worlds did not feel contradictory to me. They felt like two lenses on the same truth. Then a series of events brought them together. A friend named Sarah encountered a policy that would deny her service without a biometric scan. A pastor named John and a scholar named Professor Lewis helped us read scripture through that problem. I began researching ancient coins, papyrus, and inscriptions, and at the same time tracking news reports about cashless pilot programs. My motivation is pastoral and investigative. I want people to understand the stakes and to act with faith, not fear. Let me name people you will meet in this episode and how they matter. Samuel is a security engineer who explains the tech. Miriam is a cashier who witnessed an enrollment program. Carlos is a shopper who refused the scan. Beatrice is a store manager who enforced a new policy. Pastor John interprets prophecy in local context. Professor Lewis provides historical perspective. Anna is a historian who connects Nero to early interpretations, and David is the narrator who ties these threads together. Each of these voices will give testimony, and each will bring sensory detail to scenes you can picture. The voices interject sweat, rust, paper, electronics, a cough, a whisper, and a distant siren as the city presses against human life. I want to hear from you, so before I move on, write a comment starting with "I saw," and tell us if you have ever been asked for a biometric scan at a checkout or at a government office. I know this topic makes many feel anxious, and that is okay. Your experience matters. Start your comment with "I saw," and then a brief sentence about where it happened and how it felt. Your reply helps others see patterns and builds a shared record that informs our next videos. Now keep reading, because what you report will sync with two recent news reports and with a technical pathway I will describe next. Now picture a supermarket on a weekday afternoon. The fluorescent lights buzz. You smell coffee from the small cafe. The plastic of the basket squeaks against your palm, and a soft pop music plays overhead. I am in line with Carlos behind me. Miriam is scanning items with slow, deliberate motions. Her fingers tap metal, the barcode reader chirps, and the scanner lights make a strobe of red across the cereal boxes. A store manager named Beatrice approaches with a tablet and announces a new policy. Customers must enroll a biometric token to use the loyalty program and to access certain payment lanes. A security guard named Samuel stands at the end of the aisle with a hard face. Here is the dialogue that followed between me and Miriam. It contains the texture of fear and the clarity of moral choices. "David," I say, "you cannot require a scan for someone to buy." Food. Miriam looks up, her eyes flicker between duty and concern. Miriam: "They told us it was optional." David: "How do I opt out?" Miriam: "My hands are trembling." Miriam: "I am sorry." Miriam explains: "The tablet will flag you as unverified if you do not enroll." David: "Why would they do that?" Miriam: "They say it reduces fraud." Miriam: "But what about choice?" The manager, Beatrice, interrupts. Beatrice, we have corporate guidelines now. Beatrice, your opt-out will be limited. David, this feels wrong. Samuel adds with a clipped voice. Samuel, you can go to the regular lane, but it will take longer. Carlos, why punish those who will not enroll? Carlos, I work nights and I cannot wait. Carlos, please do not make us choose. Pastor John calls from the back. Pastor John, this is a conscience issue. Pastor John, churches should advise people not to comply with coercive enrollment. Miriam, the company gave us training. Miriam, they said refusal causes loss of access. David, then what would you do if it were your mother? Miriam, my voice cracks. I would try to find another way. Miriam, the scanner chirps again, and the fluorescent hum seems louder. The dialogue shows how a policy moves from corporate memo to human consequence, and how each word carries texture, a click, a cough, a rustle, a tear. The practical implications are immediate and deep. If a system ties identity to a market ledger, you risk exclusion. The cashless economy is not hypothetical. It is being piloted in many locations. Researchers at 2 privacy institutes and a market study published earlier this year show increased enrollment pressure where retailers partner with identity providers. Professor Lewis told me in an interview that history repeats in forms, not in identical garments. He reminded me that Nero's household and imperial stamps operated as identity markers, and that people who refused certain honors faced social and economic penalties. The number 666 appears in the text as a label associated with a name and with calculation. A method called gematria assigns numeric values to letters so that names can be reduced to numbers. In Greek and Hebrew, this was common practice. Scholars have pointed out that the numerical sum of a name like Nero in Hebrew letters can produce the number associated with the beast. Critics object that gematria can be stretched to match many names or concepts, and they are right. The technique is ambiguous, but useful for tracing how communities read numbers as coded signs. In air, there is the smell of old books, the rasp of paper turning, the low murmur of our conversation, and the taste of coffee forgotten in our mouths as we argue about meaning. Here is a short technical primer on how a chip, an image, and an AI could function together to approximate the biblical image and number scenario. Imagine a biometric token that pairs a person to an account. The token carries a serial number. A separate image recognition system could verify a person in a crowd and link the image to that serial number. If a market or state required that only those with a verified token trade, you have a mechanism for preventing purchase and sale without a specific identity signature. Now add to that a registry that assigns human-readable labels and numeric identifiers. The system could log a label that is reducible to a number using a language-based algorithm. There are many technical hurdles, ethical safeguards, and legal constraints, but the capability exists in parts. Now imagine this capability in the hands of a regime that demands allegiance and associates refusal with exclusion. The moment of tension here is the inner conflict of conscience. When you imagine your own hand stamped by a device, or when you see a loved one turned away, you feel a memory from Scripture, and you must decide whether to comply or to resist. One moment of tension I want to lay out in full starts in my chest as a slow tightening. I remember my grandmother refusing a registration during wartime. She stood in the line. The sky smelled of diesel and bread. Her voice was small but steady. She said, "I belong to God, not to a register." That memory floods me with shame and with courage. The conflict is raw. My mind flashes to faces at the supermarket and to the pastoral letters that call for courage. I could enroll to make life easier. I could decide that survival needs compromise. Or I could refuse and accept loss. The memory anchors my decision. I pray, I talk with Pastor John. I choose to refuse the coerced enrollment and to help others know they are not alone. The decision led to pain, but also to solidarity. The paragraphs of this tension are meant to show how memory shapes moral action, and how Scripture provides both warning and hope. The historical analysis of the number 666 requires some careful steps. Gematria may point to names like Nero, but it also allows for patterns that mirror political cults. The number is a symbolic hammer, not a literal lockstep. The early church used coded language to protect communities under oppression and to warn them about loyalty to emperors. Scholars such as Anna and Professor Lewis show how inscriptions, coins, and papyri provide background evidence for how ancient people understood name and number. In a modern application, the number could appear as a registry label or as an encoded identifier in a database. The link between name and number is frightening because numbers are simple and wide-reaching. They propagate without fanfare across ledgers and across machines. Some objections point out that many names sum to overlapping values and that interpretation must be humble and careful. I agree. Interpretation is not proof but pattern recognition. It illuminates how ancient readers warned their communities and how modern systems could echo that function in a different form. Now, a speculative scene to imagine how an image and a living representation could function. Picture a statue or a digital avatar on a public square. The screen brightens, the air tastes faintly of ozone. You hear the murmur of a crowd and the static of speakers. A voice issues a command, and the image moves as if alive. The AI behind it interprets gestures and speaks in a tone calibrated to persuade. The proposal is that an image could be given operational control by code that accepts worshipful gestures or payment tokens. If that image then requires a sign or a serial to interact, you have an image that mediates commerce and loyalty. The tension in this moment is visceral. You remember a child's hand reaching for a toy and being denied. You recall prayers said in secret and the fear of being marked. The conflict plays out in three parts: inner turmoil, a flash memory, then a choice. The theological stake is that worship is for God alone and that idolatrous orders must not be followed. That is why the New Testament warns against images and against coercive worship practices. Throughout this investigation, I interviewed experts and witnesses to keep the balance between alarm and accuracy. Samuel, the security engineer, described encryption and tokenization as well as the weak points where policy can force behavior. Miriam, the cashier, described the hum of fluorescent lights and the cold of corporate training. Carlos described the gut punch of being refused. Beatrice explained the pressure from corporate offices, and Pastor John offered pastoral counsel about conscience and community. Professor Lewis and Anna offered historical sources that anchor our reading. They all reported sensory details: the rust of keys, the bright blue of the tablet screen, the damp smell of a winter morning when an enrollment day was announced. These details help us see how abstract systems become lived realities. They move this issue from academic debate to shoe leather and prayer. So what can you do practically and spiritually? First, protect your privacy with basic digital hygiene. Limit biometric features. Opt out when possible, carry cash if available, and press local officials and businesses for non-coercive alternatives. Second, talk with your church leaders about conscience and about civil disobedience plans for those who refuse. Third, study Scripture, Apocalypse 13, Deuteronomy, and other texts, not to find a secret code, but to understand how early believers read resistance. I also encourage community action. Collect testimonies and report coercive practices to privacy organizations. If you are uncertain about the interpretation, that is okay. The Bible invites both study and humility. Now, the final moments of this video are an epilogue in 3 acts. First, a pastoral appeal. If you are watching this and you feel afraid, remember that fear is a signal but not a verdict. God is not surprised by technology or by tyranny. Jesus Christ invites faith that acts. Even in the face of difficulty. If you want to talk about faith or how to respond in your community, reach out to your pastor or to the ministries you trust. Second, a practical recap. We covered biblical imagery about hand and forehead, we examined how ancient name-number techniques like gematria work, we interviewed engineers and witnesses, and we described plausible technical pathways where chips, AI, and registries could be fused to restrict commerce. Third, a call to action and to hope. Do not let fear become paralysis. Inscribe this verse in your mind, pray with your family, learn protective habits, and join a community that will stand with you if coercion appears. There is work to do, but also reason to hope. If this topic moved you and you want deeper material, subscribe and click the notification so you do not miss the next video where we examine current pilot programs in cashless economies and the implications for religious conscience. If you want to continue the conversation, leave a comment starting with "I saw" and tell us your experience. If you cannot find hope today, remember that truth and courage often start with a small refusal and a prayer. The final image I leave you with is simple and sharp. Imagine a hand open and empty, not stamped, and a forehead lifted toward the light. That image is both a challenge and a promise. Keep watching, keep praying, and keep your feet ready to stand for what is right.